Y'all, can I tell you about these Tecovas boots? I don't know if y'all know this, but these boots are handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable right out of the box. I know we buy everything online these days, but boots are something you really should get fitted for. And it just so happens Tecovas is based right here in Austin. So come shop with me at the Tecovas store on South Congress or the Domain. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, Austin City Council members have adopted the city's budget for the next fiscal year, and it's only a measly $5.9 billion. Where is all that money going to go, and how much is going to be coming out of our pockets? I'm here with Amy Stansberry of the Austin Common to break it all down. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Thursday, August 22nd. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here with Amy Stansberry, editor-in-chief of the Austin Common. Hello, Amy. Welcome back.
Hi, happy to be back talking budget again.
Oh my gosh, listen, after I saw this $5.9 billion, I was like, I know exactly who we need to talk to. So Austin City Council just adopted their budget. The vote was 10-1 after hearing from the public in town halls and council meetings. How did the budget process go this year? With the new mayor, in comparison to previous years, it seemed like everything happened very, very fast, but maybe that's just me.
It did, but that is kind of how it tends to happen. What's been happening over the past few weeks is city council members have been hard at work, basically writing up their long, long list of amendments or changes to that original proposed budget that the city manager put out there. And I mean, we're talking pages and pages of amendments and proposed changes, and then they start to debate them and discuss them, and then a few rise to the top. And that's kind of what happened on Wednesday. They pick which changes they're actually going to make and pass it.
This was another big test for our, essentially our he's still new, city manager, TC Broadnax. Like, how did he do?
It seemed okay. He's definitely, like I think we said last time, he's so far been pretty quiet on the dais, and really a lot of this budget process was led by existing city staff. People have been there for a while and know what's going, and I think he really let those folks take the lead, share the information. But in general, I think it was a pretty smooth city budget process. And some more conversations were had, like with homelessness, about thinking about things longer term, and thinking about our budget outlook longer term, which I think is a good thing, right? We have to be financially responsible. We have to think about not just what's going to happen this year, but what's going to happen several years out. And that's what the city budget office is trying to do a better job at letting council know. Here's the impact of this policy potentially years from now, or here's our gaps. So there was a lot more conversation around that, which council seemed to be appreciative of, and I think can help them plan better in the future.
So tell us about the money going into the city. So what's changing when it comes to fees and taxes? Because we know that this is the largest budget the city has seen.
So it is, technically the largest budget, but I'll qualify that by saying that pretty much every year in recent memory is the largest budget. The city's budget tends to get a little bit bigger every single year.
Okay, that's great context.
It is increasing for sure. You'll pay a little bit more to the city of Austin this year, and that's been compounding year over year. But the city, as we get bigger and bigger, our budget grows. That's kind of been the way it's been for many years now. But the average, the typical Austin homeowner will pay about $15 more a month in property taxes, towards the city of Austin. But then, the bigger thing this year is that, that typical Austin homeowner will pay also an additional $15 in fees to the city. So that includes even things like your water bill, what you pay for trash, recycling, compost pickup, things like that. So some more of those costs went up this year. So then in total, if you count what you're paying in property taxes, what you're paying in all those fees for services to the city, they estimate about $30 more a month.
Wow. So I want to be clear now, renters will also be paying fees because if we're talking about electricity or water or, because sometimes I think, the misunderstanding is that if you're not a homeowner, then you're not affected by these kind of increases.
Yes, that's a very popular misconception because, the language the city always uses is the typical Austin homeowner. But that's just so that we have a reference point to go off of. But yes, the fees, that's something even a renter will pay, right? If you're renting, you still pay Austin Water, Austin Energy, et cetera, for all your bills. So that's more direct. You'll see that directly. Then when it comes to property taxes, as a renter, sure, you don't directly pay a property tax bill. But I always say, unless you somehow have the nicest landlord in the world, they are definitely passing along property tax increases to you.
Right. Now, are there any other ways that increases are going to be felt by Austinites?
So those are the big ones. People might have seen in the news there was a proposal out there to increase the entrance fees at Barton Springs Pool from $5 to $8. That proposal was killed.
Okay.
Because of popular backlash from the public. That was a short-lived proposal because once people started to find out about it, started calling their council members, and city council decided they weren't going to go with that. They were not raising fees at Barton Springs Pool. So,
when you show up and make your voice heard, things can get done or not get done.
Exactly. Yes, that's a good example of that. Yes.
What are the big priorities with this big budget?
Yeah. So basically, what happens every year is they put together, city manager puts together this budget proposal. And then usually there's some amount of money that he hasn't dedicated towards anything. Maybe we'd call it quote unquote extra money, but there's a lot of things that need to be funded with it. And he kind of shares that with council and says, you all decide how you want to spend this. And so that's where you get a lot of these council budget amendments, and they have all these different priorities about things that we could fund. And there's kind of a bucket that is for one-time funding, which just means we have money available this year. You could fund a short-term program or a one-off expense, like buying lawnmowers for the parks department, right? Or you could have ongoing expenses. Those are harder to fund, right? Because that means you're pledging to fund it every year. And that might be for more like an employee that might work year over year. So there's some tension that comes in there.
Right. Okay.
But some of the things that ended up getting funded that council really pushed for, one of the big ones is additional park maintenance staff. So I think we talked about this when the budget was first proposed. There's a huge gap in our park maintenance abilities. We've been adding more parkland, which is great, but we haven't been keeping up with the maintenance side. And so I think the number ended up being about 16 new park maintenance employees are going to be working for the city and helping to keep our parks clean.
In an earlier interview, you mentioned that we were hoping to get more funding for maintenance that would bring them up to 2014 levels. So, is that still the goal, or are we now just thinking about we staffing for 2025 and hoping for the best?
16 was what was requested from the Parks Foundation and different parks groups. So that is the level they were looking for. I still think there's space for improvement, but that gets us back to a basic level. So that's like something that came from some activism and pushing from the public, and then also some council members who were supportive of that one.
Nice.
Another big topic of conversation and a council priority this session was homelessness services. There's a group in town called Vocal Texas. They're an advocacy, grassroots advocacy organization. And what they do is they actually work with Austin's unhoused community. They go out onto the streets, they host organizing meetings with folks, and they listen to them and see, what are your concerns? What do you think is not working about our city's homelessness system, right? Because these are the people who are actually in it. And through that effort, they found some issues and gaps with our one of our city's homelessness services called Rapid Rehousing, which is a program where someone who's experiencing homelessness is given up to 2 years of rental assistance and placement in a housing unit. And it's a great program. It works really well, but it works best for people who are newly unhoused. But the city was putting a lot of people, into those kind of programs who had been unhoused for 7, 8 years, long time, that needed way more help and assistance.
Right. Yeah.
And so this group, Vocal Texas, they started bringing people to City Hall and raising this issue. You saw council start to take this issue seriously. Some things were put into this budget to help address that gap and that issue and figure out ways to better place people into services. And council had an entire budget work section dedicated to homelessness.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So homelessness prevention is an area we have not funded thoroughly as a city, and it's so much cheaper than waiting until someone falls into homelessness.
Right.
And so there was a bigger push and some extra funding got put aside this year for homelessness prevention services, eviction protections, one-time funding for families that, they might just be, they had a medical emergency, something happened, and if someone could help them pay that 1 month rent or whatever, then they won't get evicted. Like things like that can really be, in the scheme of things, pretty inexpensive and prevent a downward spiral that, would hurt that family, cost a lot more money.
Yeah.
So they're really starting to dig into this issue, which is great. And advocacy has been really key in it. The thing that's difficult is one of the things that I walked away from after watching that work session is, wow, we have a huge funding gap. Austin hasn't made big investments in our city's budget in homelessness services, at least compared to the rest of the budget. And the need is just growing and growing and growing. And city staff really laid out a picture of extremely high need that would just cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
There was a lot of conversation around how can we fund this? How can we provide the services that our community needs? And so more funding was allocated to some of these homelessness services, but there's still a big gap. A lot of our homelessness services right now are funded through ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. This was a big pot of federal money that came down after COVID, but it's going to run out at the end of 2026. And when that happens, we don't have a lot of plans in place right now as to how to keep those programs running without that cash infusion from the federal government. And so that's really the tension that's at play. And they put some more money in this year, but that'll be an ongoing budget conversation. They can't fund it all by themselves. Additional money needs to be coming in. A lot of city council members have been saying we need to do a better job engaging private philanthropy.
Oh.
We need other community partners to help fund these efforts. More money from the federal government, more money from the state, more money from nonprofits or rich people who live in Austin who can donate money.
We need help. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we need help. It seems to be something that the city of Austin alone can't fund. And other cities that have had more success in solving their homelessness problems, like Houston, have been able to do it because they've been able to really leverage support from the community, from philanthropy, things like that. And so that, I think, is something you're going to see come up more and more. It's trying to figure out a way we can be more organized as a community, because that's been a big issue too, is like, are we being as strategic as possible with where our money goes?
Right.
And the answer is probably no. And so how can we be more strategic about that process? We now finally have our own, an independent, an office dedicated just to homelessness. We had not had that before. This is really their first year. You can start to see that progress happening. And at least now homelessness is its own line item in the city budget. That makes it a lot easier to figure out how much are we actually spending on different programs. Before, they were like all jumbled up throughout all different city departments. It made it very difficult to track. So we're making some progress, but there's a long way to go.
I like that they're no longer just kind of piecemealing and taking a little from here and a little from there. And I think it can't be overstated how important it is to just have a more robust response to this. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
I just read an interview the other day that was talking about the Austin Animal Center and how they are just like past capacity. And so, was there any mention about the Austin Animal Center?
Yes. So, a few things. There was $425,000 increase in funding for supplies just for the center.
Okay.
And then $30,000 one-time funding for animal boarding services to help with capacity. And then council actually put forward some amendments to increase funding a little bit further for some employees that could help with fostering and adoption of pets.
Oh, I like that.
So all of these things are meant to help with some of these overcrowding. And I think that they certainly will help. I'm sure if you talk to some activists in this space, there's there's continued room for improvement, but some progress was made here.
That's good. At least they addressed it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So let's talk about the police department. The APD's budget is a budget that we can give them more, but we cannot ever take away. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And so that's what makes these police budget conversations really contentious and difficult. What ended up happening in the end with this police department budget was that it was increased by $18.2 million. So the city APD has some civilian employees, people who are working, at a front desk or what have you.
Right. So
those are not police officers, firefighters, or EMS personnel.
Like dispatch, yeah.
Yeah, so those all got a 4% pay increase. So that was part of that $18.2 million. There were also some things with pension liability and things like that. Now, the big question mark is what comes next. So our police department has been out of contract for quite a while now, if people remember.
Yeah.
And so the way these sworn officers, that's our actual police officers, the way their salaries and such are determined are through these contracts. There's negotiation between the city of Austin, the Austin Police Association, and they negotiate what wages are going to be usually for like the next 5 years. So those conversations had stalled for a while. They've picked back up recently. And it seems like whatever contract we end up getting is going to have wage increases for those police officers. Now, that we don't really know yet what is in that contract proposal. Negotiations are happening. What happens now is money was kind of set aside, and it's kind of a question. It's like a big question mark in the budget.
Okay.
And we'll see. We'll wait and see. Probably over the next, month or two, we might end up getting the results of these negotiations, and then council will have to vote on that.
The budget is done. It's adopted. And so where is the money going to come from?
This is admittedly a little bit confusing and unclear. Baked into this budget that is passed is a certain amount of money that's been set aside, unencumbered, undedicated to anything. That's kind of set aside.
What?
Of saying, hey, you do not spend this right now. Wait, because we need to see what's going to happen with this police contract. And then we can pull from that money once the police contract is approved, if it includes increases. So we have the money set aside, at least for this upcoming year. But how much of it do we pull from? And how much could be left over? There is some money set aside, but it has implications, obviously, for future years.
Okay.
If increases are included, that means we have to fund that, year over year. And
exactly.
And that's really where a lot of this tension comes with this ongoing funding conversation, not just with APD, but all departments. If you, the second you add a new employee that's long-term in any department or give them an increase, that's money. You have to fund that not just 1 year, but many years out into the future when we don't know what our financial future might look like. I think it's about $25 million, I believe. If we don't need it, it can go back into the budget and be spent on something else.
Okay.
But likely we're going to need it, or we're going to need some percentage of it in order to fund wage increases at the police department, because that's what the police association is pushing for. There's going to be a lot of debate over this in the coming months of what we're willing to pay APD and also what kind of oversight measures might be included in that police contract.
Wow.
That's the tension usually.
25 million is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about Austin Police Department budget numbers, because they make up such a big portion of our general fund number, that 35%,
Yeah.
I think their budget is somewhere in the $480 million mark. So when we're talking about dollars for APD, we're talking big numbers. $18 million increase, 25 million, whatever.
Yeah.
When we're talking about budget conversations in the other departments, it's way smaller. For example, so for the 16 new maintenance positions at the Parks Department, $1.2 million.
Okay.
Right? So big differences. And that's been a big point of tension is how can, there were some homelessness activist groups who were saying, man, that $18 million that increase at the police department budget, that's like almost half of the homeless strategy office's entire budget.
Got it. Okay. And so we also heard in a recent interview with Zoe Caudry how helpful it was to have Austin EMS stationed at Lady Bird Lake near Rainey Street. And apparently they stopped like 50 people from wandering into the water unsuspectedly. Do we know if that pilot program was fully funded?
Well, one thing I do know is that for EMS, a big thing that council did pass this budget cycle is they established a downtown EMS command center for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night.
Love it.
Because you know what it's like downtown on the weekends.
Right.
There's a lot of need for EMS.
Love to hear that. So what are we leaving out? Is there anything that you think should have gotten more funding that was omitted from this year's budget? Is there anything else we should know?
Some other things that council advocated for that got in the budget: an expansion of the city's mobile crisis outreach team, or MCOT, or expanded mobile crisis outreach team. These folks, they respond to mental health calls, can really help divert people from emergency rooms and jails. They had been only operating sometimes. We didn't have enough funding for them to operate all the time. Now they're going to operate 24/7.
What? I did not know that.
Yeah. So that was a big one. I believe that Councilmember Ryan Alser was able to successfully get in an amendment to add an additional fire department cadet class this year so that we could have more firefighters. One of the things that came up in this budget conversation was that firefighters' mental health is really suffering. They're working a lot of hours. And so this was to try and address that, see if we could boost the number of firefighters and help out with that issue. Some more funding for the city's downtown Austin Community Court, which is a court, but it serves our unhoused population and tries to figure out ways that they can get services instead of having to pay tickets and things like that. It provides them an alternative from the criminal justice path. So that's a program that's been really successful in the city. We've been running it for a really long time, but adding some more case managers, some more help with that. So a lot of, we hear a lot in the headlines, of course. There's the bad or all the drama, but there are a lot of really interesting, innovative programs that the city funds and got funding this time around. Civilian Conservation Corps is another one. That's a kind of climate program, hires young people in our community to work in green jobs. That got some funding.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So now the budget is adopted and everything is done and it's wrapped in a nice bow. The way I understand it, that means almost immediately the budget for the next year, it's time to start thinking about that almost immediately. Is that right?
That's pretty much right. Nothing to get stressed about, but basically the way it works is we just approve this budget. It officially goes into effect on October 1st. That's the start of the city's new fiscal year. And then usually in the fall, late fall, some of our city's boards and commissions, which are those kind of resident advisory groups, they start to get together and host town halls and meetings of their own in order to get feedback from their community about what recommendations they might want to give to city council for budget for the next year. So if you are someone that got hooked, you loved all these budget conversations we've been having, and you feel like, it's kind of hard for me to follow. It's so fast. Going to some of those, keeping an eye out for those town hall meetings, all the city's quality of life commissions, which are, we have like an, Latinx Quality of Life Commission, a Black African American Quality of Life Commission.
Yeah.
All of those commissions host these town halls or public input opportunities. Those are a really great way to really shape the budget development. What happens here that we just did, you're more like calling council and saying, vote for this or this. If you get involved early, you can actually decide what the this or this is.
And so there is no rest.
There is no rest.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process. So, it's good and bad, right? It means that if you're disappointed, that's okay. You still got time. You still got people to talk to, council members to talk to. And if you did come away from this budget conversation with something, think about who you're going to vote for in November too, right?
That's right. It is an election year.
That's a big piece of it, right? We got to see how these council members voted on different issues. If you really liked what your council member did, if you were disappointed in what they did, you might be able to vote for them in November.
Amy, this has been great as usual. Thank you so much for being here and keeping me up to speed.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. Happy to do it.
I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Amy's website and social media in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.